Okay, so hi everyone. This is a video audio walkthrough of on the theory for inflation. So how do we define inflation? This is the full definition to use: a general increase in prices. So prices across the economy going up. But at the same time, because this is happening, the money is losing purchasing power. So any given amount of money will buy you less over time, loss of purchasing power. Okay, through the course, we don't really do too much talk about money and what it is, but this is one part of the syllabus where it does pop up. So there are three possible functions of money and why it exists. The one is to act as like the blood of the economy, to help the organs of the economy work, to get things moving. So trade only exists, the exchange of goods really or can happen more easily or more effectively with the existence of money. So it's a way of exchanging goods and services without the need for barter. Alternatively, it could be a store of value, but of course, with inflation, it will likely lose purchasing power, but it can, of course, hold some kind of value to buy things at a future date. And finally, as we saw in year 10 through the market system, when we look at the free market and demand supply, one of the requirements of that is price setting. So to set a price, you must have a currency or money to actually value something to enable the system to work. So there are three functions of money: medium of exchange, store of value, and unit of account. Now, when you start your research, you may find that you come up against a chart of inflation. What we're going to look at next is what these charts actually show. This is actually Hong Kong inflation rate. And as you can see, it's a bar chart showing over a 2 or 3 year period what the inflation rate was. The inflation rate, which is here between 1 and 3%, shows us how much on average prices across the economy are moving up year on year as a percentage. So 2% means, compared with the year previously, prices are 2% higher. There is 2 or 3 different terms relating to this. I've already mentioned what inflation is. There is also deflation, which is falling prices. Remember, really, across an economy at any time, though, some prices could be going up and some prices could be going down, but this is on average across the economy. Prices can be going up, but at a slightly slower rate than before, and this is called disinflation. So if we go back to our Hong Kong table a second, we can see that actually prices are going up through this whole period. So Hong Kong is experiencing inflation throughout this whole period. This, of course, would not be the case if any of these numbers were negative, and you may find that, particularly for countries like Japan. However, for some of these periods of time, for example here, in the first 3 bar charts, we can see that inflation remains, but has been going up at a slowing rate: 2, 1.8, 1.4. That is disinflation. Prices rising at a slower rate. Okay, so how do we actually calculate inflation? So remember, with economic growth, we had GDP. As with GDP, there is lots of different types of ways of measuring inflation. You'll find there's CPI, RPI, and a few variants of those. In your syllabus, they focus primarily on the CPI. It's called the Consumer Price Index, and it's a weighted index of over 600 goods and services. And that index, that basket of goods, is how we calculate from year on year how much in percentage terms it changes. In addition to that, that basket of goods will change. The goods in that basket are not the same as they were 30 years ago. So it should on average represent the typical consumer in the country it represents. The other term that sometimes causes confusion is this idea of weighted. What weighted means is you don't simply want, 100 goods equally represented in the index. Of course, what we tend to do as consumers is spend more on some things than others. We might very rarely buy um, caviar, but we might commonly buy eggs. So it doesn't make sense that they should both have equal representation in the CPI. Okay, what I'd like you to do now is just to pause the video for a second and just think for a few moments about what would be in your basket of goods, your top 10, and just think what percentage rate you would have on each, okay? And come back in a couple of minutes. Okay, welcome back. You'll probably find that the type of things that you have in your basket of goods are very different to the average person in Hong Kong, which would be more like your parents. You may find you had a lot more on snacks or entertainment. A typical household in Hong Kong will have this kind of breakdown. And as you can see, the weighting is on the right. Housing is about 40% of what people spend their money on. Food and beverages about 15%, and transport about 16%, and the rest take in smaller roles. So of course it wouldn't make sense if the price of buses or MTR, which people use every day, has the same representation as, say, booking a tennis court at your local leisure centre. Each year, some items are added or remained. This is a news article which shows how in the UK, some products are taken in and some products are taken out. As we can see here, in this particular example, things like leggings, quiche, and raspberries were brought into the CPI. If we scroll down, we should perhaps find peaches, nectarines have been removed. Pasty and pie categories are given way to more broadly defined cooked pastry, paste snacks. So all somewhat vague, but broadly just kind of representing general changes in consumer patterns and trends. Okay, moving on to the next thing. There are three possible causes of inflation. In theory, number one, we have demand pull inflation. So if you think back to year 10, and we did demand supply curve, for individual industries, if demand increased, price rose. If you can't remember that, I suggest now you pause the video and look back on your notes. Now, if that happens in a large number of markets, across tourism, across transport markets and education, then it's possible indeed that we are seeing prices rise across the economy and CPI going up. So it's worth thinking about what causes demand to increase, things like population, income, change in taste and popularity of goods and services. Number two, cost push inflation. Think back to your year 10 notes again. And if supply shifted left or decreased, one of the reasons for that would have been increasing costs of production. When that happens, also prices can rise to a new price equilibrium. Once again, if this happens across the economy, so if costs which are common to a lot of businesses, like labor costs for workers, wages, or things like oil and energy, which are common to most businesses, if they rise, it's likely that supply will shift in most industries and CPI across the economy will increase. Those two are one way of looking at inflation. There is, although, having said that, an alternative kind of ideology in economics, which considers inflation broadly as more a money supply issue. What I'd like you to do now is to have a look at this DuckTales video and then think a little bit before you return as to what monetarism or the money supply inflation might refer to. Okay, once you've had a look at that, now you've returned, Monetarism is the idea that money supply is directly related to inflation. So as you saw in the video, when the ducks had the ability to multiply money or increase money, then that caused an additional amount of prices going up in the economy, and that money didn't become or wasn't worth any more. It works as an idea, and it is an alternative way of thinking about inflation, otherwise known as monetarism. So the supply of money or money supply is directly proportional to the rates of inflation in the economy. For example, if you create more money, prices will rise. Okay, now onto the consequences of inflation. Firstly, reduces purchasing power, as mentioned. Money becomes worth less. And if you're a saver and you've got large amounts of savings, and indeed if you're older or elderly and saved through your career or your job, you may find that loses purchasing power and then hence you become poorer as a result. Increase in business costs. Of course, inflation is constantly putting pressure on businesses. In a competitive market where they need to keep prices competitive, that may force a businesses to either cut jobs or to find alternative ways to cut costs or indeed to increase their own prices. And hence, that's why we might say that inflation kind of feeds through the economy. Balance of payments, we've not covered this yet, but in another next week, we'll look at current account. We'll see exports and imports. And if your prices go up, of course, your exports will appear less attractive to foreigners. So people are less likely to buy your products if your inflation is only in your country. So it could cause current account or balance of payment problems. Wages will fall. Well, real wages will fall. A company may put up your wages because of inflation, but if it's not the same rate of inflation, what we can say is that real wages will not be keeping up with inflation. Menu costs. Simple, practical part of this is that businesses, particularly shops and retailers and restaurants, need to keep upgrading their materials, marketing materials, menus to reflect the change in prices. Shoe leather costs. Companies will need to find new suppliers. This takes resources, effort, and time. This has an opportunity cost for the business. And inflation itself, as we'll see shortly by looking at a country like Venezuela, has or creates enormous amounts of uncertainty. Businesses don't know when to plan for the future. Consumers are often uncertain or lack confidence about when to purchase goods or services, and investment decisions can be stalled. This is often not good for an economy, and we would often argue that inflation is destabilizing for an economy. Okay, I'm going to pause the video in a moment and we're going to come back together as a class. If you can make sure your notes and your revision table is up to date and then have any questions about the theory that we've covered, please ask when we're back in the lesson. What we're going to look at next is examples or case studies where inflation has, for example, got out of control. That's what's called hyperinflation. This is a picture of Germany pre-war, children using money as building blocks. And we're going to stop the video now, but as a class, we are going to look at examples of Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Okay, thank you very much and see you very, very soon.